Hi class, this is Dr. Mark Price. Welcome to the first of a series of PowerPoint lectures that I've constructed for this class. There'll be one every week, and what I've done is I've chosen several of the more complicated concepts that we encounter in the class, and I've put together a slideshow with lecture that you can view and listen to. And be sure to ask questions that come up after you've viewed the PowerPoint. What I want to begin with for this first week is a discussion of the relationship between ethics and religion. We are in Philosophy 330, and this class is an investigation of what I'm calling philosophical ethics. And philosophical ethics is the attempt to discover the right and wrong-making features of acts, or if you like, the good and bad-making features of acts. What we want to do is determine what it is that an act has, some quality that it has that makes it right or wrong, that makes it moral or makes it immoral. That's what ethics tries to do, philosophical ethics. We want to know what is the feature that an act needs to have in order for it to be right. Now many people, and some of you probably included, many people believe that moral action is somehow tied to belief in a deity and belief in a god or gods. This is very common, this connection between morality and God. And so many people believe that we ought to do what God wants us to do. What I want to talk about is how that really doesn't have any impact on philosophical ethics. You know, that view is fine, and really philosophers are going to go about their business and not pay much attention to that belief. And even many philosophers hold this view as well, but it doesn't stop us from doing philosophical ethics. This issue of the connection between morality and religion was covered in ancient Greece by the philosopher Plato, and he wrote a dialogue called the Euthyphro. And in this dialogue, it's like a little play where there's no action, there's just conversation. Socrates and Euthyphro are discussing morality. Well, Socrates is a philosopher. You've probably encountered him in some of your other classes. And Euthyphro was a religious expert. He was a theologian, if you will. And Euthyphro says that the right acts are those that the gods like. Right? So this is ancient Greece, and so Euthyphro, much to Socrates' surprise, really does believe in Zeus and Apollo and Athena and all that. Socrates' view is a little more modern, perhaps, than Euthyphro's. That's a conversation for another day, perhaps. But Euthyphro says that moral acts are those acts that the gods like. You know, that Zeus and Apollo and Athena, when those beings like acts, those are the right acts. Those are the moral. So Socrates asks an intriguing question, and Euthyphro in the dialogue is unable to deal with it. So Socrates asks, okay, well, are some acts moral because the gods like them? Or do the gods like them because they're moral? So the idea is that the first side of the question, does the gods liking the act make it moral, or are the acts moral and the gods like the acts because they're moral? Let's take the first side. Let's say, okay, yes, some acts are moral because the gods like them. Euthyphro might have responded this way and said, yep, that's what I meant. Some acts are moral because the gods like them. The problem with the answer is that it doesn't really explain why some acts are moral. It just tells us that the gods like them. It doesn't tell us why the gods like them, and in fact, that question wouldn't even make sense. So we say some acts are moral because the gods like them. If you ask me, why do the gods like them? I wouldn't have an answer. That question doesn't even work. But that seems like a real question. That's something I want to know. If an act is moral because the gods like it, I'd like to know why the gods like it. Suppose that the gods like truth-telling and dislike telling falsehoods on this view, that an act is moral because the gods like it. So gods like truth-telling, they dislike telling falsehoods, and so telling the truth is good, it's moral. Telling lies, well, that's bad, that's immoral. So we say, okay, truth-telling is moral and lying is immoral. But if there's no answer to the question, why do the gods like truth-telling, then it could just as easily be the case that the gods like lying instead. Right? So if we ask, why do the gods like truth-telling, and there's no answer to that question, then it stands to reason that the gods could just as easily start liking lying. Then lying would be moral. And that's troubling. And as soon as we start talking about killing innocents instead of lying, then it gets really troubling. So a view that says that an act is moral simply because God or the gods like it, that's in trouble, because it seems purely arbitrary. If there's no answer to the question, why does God like this act, then it looks like ethics is in big trouble. Let's try the other side. Cause an act is moral. There are some acts that the gods like because they're moral. So Euthyphro said, the moral acts are those the gods like. And suppose that what he meant by that was that, there are some acts that Zeus and Hera and Apollo and Athena, that they like. And the reason they like them is because those acts are moral. And gods like moral acts. So the gods recognize that those acts are moral, and so they like them. In the same way that you and I do. Right? When we see a moral act, we like that moral act. We see an immoral act, we don't like it. So because the gods are good, because the gods are moral beings, now that's problematic to some extent when we talk about ancient Greek religion. But if we modernize it and we start talking about the God of Abraham, that God is a moral God. He's a good God. And he sees some acts and recognizes that those acts are moral, and he likes them. And he encourages us to be. This view implies that there is something about some acts that the gods recognize, or God. There's something about some acts that God recognizes and likes it, or recognizes that it's moral, and so encourages you and I to behave morally. So in other words, there is some right-making feature that rests in acts that God recognizes. If we're talking about Zeus and Hera or the God of Abraham, because of his wisdom, his understanding, he recognizes these right-making features and so likes it because of these right-making features. Well, what are these right-making features that the gods recognize? If we take the answer, if we say the gods like certain acts because they're moral, because the gods recognize these qualities that the acts have, well, I want to know what those are. I don't just want to be told, these are the moral acts, do these, because I'm a philosopher. I want to know what those are. I want to understand. I want to recognize those features myself. And that's the project for philosophical ethics. Right? So the project for philosophical ethics, what philosophers want to do is, we want to find out what those right-making features are. And that God happens to recognize, if God exists, right? And that's an open question for philosophy. If God happens to exist, and God recognizes those features and encourages us to act morally, that's all fine and good, but that doesn't answer the question for philosophical ethics. Our work is still there to be done. So if we say moral acts are those that the gods like, that doesn't answer our question. We're still working on it.